I'm not sure about this, the man said as we prepped him for surgery. We transported the terminally ill subject from one of the company's facilities, but his condition was beyond even our ability to heal. If everything you told us is true, there's no reason to worry. These surgeons are more capable than anyone else on Earth. You have a second chance at life here, Mr. Johnson, I said reassuringly. Truth be told, I couldn't know for certain if the man would live. He was just one of 74 subjects sent to the surgeons at Volkheim Hospital. The place was run down World War II era structure situated in the most eastern part of Germany, in a town leveled by B-17 bombers in the end stage of the war. All that remained was a few ruins long since sealed off by the company, restricting access to only the most essential of personnel. The subjects were specifically brought to Germany for this experiment, a moral judgment. I swear, I answered everything truthfully as God is my witness. He was terrified of death, I'd seen that much. If a man truly held religious views, he surely'd end up in hell for his crimes. But as an atheist, I figured the company would be the next best thing. We knew everything about the man's past. We knew about his murders, his robberies, and his scams. He was remarkably good at them, always running from the law, jumping from identity to identity, but disease was the one earthly thing the man could not overcome. He'd been afflicted with a rare liver disease, one that would take his life in less than 3 years. A transplant would have been possible, but with his unique genetic background, a match was damn near impossible. Then I estimate a 90% chance of success. You're going to be treated just the way a man in your stature deserves. Mr. Johnson was a rich man, and his new, fake identity reflected that. He was the perfect subject, and if our suspicion was true, we'd have a cure for more or less any disease. Are you ready? I asked, trying to hide my distaste for the man. Truth be told, it was an honor for me to enter Volkheim Hospital. As a simple crewman, I had no business setting foot inside the restricted grounds of the hospital, but after a loyal service to the company and recruitment of 74 awaiting subjects, I was allowed to guide them through the halls towards the OR, where the surgeon awaited. You understand the terms of treatment? I asked. He nodded. I need you to say it. I understand, he said nervously. Good. With that, 2 of the guards put a bag over his head and carried him to the windowless transportation vehicle. The location was strictly confidential, and though we could have sedated the man, it would have went against the terms of the treatment. We drove for 5 hours, going off-road and into the forest. It was a difficult trek, only few vehicles would be able to handle, but it aided in keeping the location information secure. Once we arrived, it was as if we'd traveled back in time. There was an ancient military camp situated among the ruins of the village, with abandoned vehicles and weapons strewn about. I exited the front of the vehicle while the guards got Mr. Johnson out. He stumbled onto the ground, severely disoriented by the journey. Where are we? Johnson asked as I pulled the bag from his head. His face went from nervous to panicked as he observed his surroundings. The ancient look of the place didn't exactly reassure our subjects, but he had been warned. This doesn't look right, he said. There's no going back now, I replied. He looked at each of the guards, both of them heavily armed and ready to fire should he attempt an escape. We led him through the village towards the hospital. It was the most modern building there, constructed in 1939 and meant for battlefield casualties. There were no people in the village, at least none living, nor was the hospital staffed. The only place still holding signs of twisted life was the surgical wing. "Let's talk about the questions you answered," I said as we walked him in through the main entrance. The walls were covered with mold, and the concrete was beginning to chip apart. By all means, it looked abandoned, which was only a partial truth. "The questions?" he asked, getting more nervous with every step. "You claim to have answered everything truthfully, is that correct?" I asked. Yeah, of course." The questions themselves weren't anything you'd normally see on a hospital form. They were all moral questions ranging from basic inquiries about theft to admissions of murder based on his paper. He was a perfect man who donated generously to various charities. Originally, that was part of his fake identity, something the company knew. The question was whether or not the surgeon would know. We took Johnson down to the basement of the hospital, a place meant to protect against bombs dropped during surgery. It was a dark place with stale air and a moist floor. A long cable stretched through the hall, miraculously lighting up bulbs from the last millennia despite having no obvious source of electricity. A few gurneys stood on the side, and for some time since entering the hospital, we saw signs of life. There were a few nurses standing motionlessly on the sides of the hallway, wearing old-fashioned gowns and white unmarked hats. On their left arms, they all had armbands with a plus symbol, and they all wore gas masks obscuring their faces. I don't understand. This can't be the place," Johnson said. "Oh, I can assure you that it is. This is the only place in the world where the worthy can be saved." "The worthy? What the hell are you talking about?" he asked. "Those who deserve to be saved will make a full recovery. But based on your answers, you're definitely one of them, isn't that right, Mr. Johnson?" I asked back. He didn't respond. He just followed us diligently, too afraid to put up a fight against the guards walking behind him. We walked past several rooms only separated by curtains, and on the floor before them lay puddles of dried-out blood. It didn't help Johnson into a sense of security. Who are these people? Why are they all wearing gas masks? "They are here to judge us," I said matter-of-factly. "But only you are going to be judged by the surgeon." "What is that?" he asked. "We call him the surgeon." As we reached the end of the hall, we passed about a dozen nurses. All turned to stare silently at us. They were all marked as battlefield casualties, meaning they should be dead. At the end of the hallway stood a chair. It was next to the last room and had armrests. "Sit," I ordered. "No, I'm not doing this," he said. "Either you sit in that chair or you die from liver failure in a year. This will at least give you a chance at life." He stared at me for a second. His eyes were tinted with a weak yellow, meaning signs of liver failure had already appeared. He might even have been just months away from death. Closer than expected. He knew he wasn't going to make it without our help. He could feel the disease within him killing him. Whether God had inflicted him with the disease or if nature had just played him a random card, he'd find out soon enough. One of the nurses approached us with a syringe in hand. "What's that?" Johnson asked nervously. "Something to make you relax for the surgery. Can't have you all tensed up." I didn't lie, it was a muscle relaxant. One not known to any doctor on the planet, nor had we been able to fully analyze the substance. But it worked. Problem was that it did nothing for the pain. It only paralyzed the subject to prep them for surgery. Johnson diligently handed the nurse his arm, and she injected the substance without speaking a word, only breathing heavily through the gas mask. Once they were done, they quickly escorted him inside and put him on the bed just in time for the medicine to work. He collapsed onto the bed and unable to move anything but his eyes. In the corner of the operating room stood a surgeon facing the wall. He was the one that would decide our subject's ultimate outcome. The nurses left the room and the surgeon turned to us. Unlike the nurses, he wasn't wearing a gas mask and didn't even have a face for that matter. His head was just covered in smooth skin with a few strands of hair randomly attached to his skull. It was the first time during the trip where I'd felt genuine fear rise through my body. Though we weren't the subjects, I could feel the creature analyze us, judge us for a moment, and I doubted whether or not we were doing the right thing. But then I remembered what kind of man Johnson really was. Johnson looked panicked, but his muscles were paralyzed. He wasn't even able to talk. The surgeon approached him and just stared at him, judging every act he'd ever committed. We stood by waiting for a decision, and once the judgment had passed, he let out a low-pitched screech, alerting the assisting nurse to enter the room with a tray of old tools. All the while, I just wondered what the surgeon had found out. He grabbed a scalpel and bent over to start his first incision. The moment of truth was upon us, but before he started, I looked Johnson straight in the eyes. "I know who you are, Mr. Henderson," I said. His eyes lit up in fear as he heard his real name, but he couldn't respond. "I wish you had answered truthfully. Then we wouldn't have to do this," I whispered into his ear. With that, the surgeon started his first incision. A Y-shaped cut, typically not for surgery, but for autopsies. He cut deeper and deeper, exposing the fat, muscle, and finally organs. All the while, Johnson tried to scream in pain, but no sound came out. Once the surgeon had reached his lungs, Johnson lost his ability to breathe. He must have been in excruciating pain, but luckily for him, he wouldn't have to suffer long. A shiver went down my spine as the fear built up within me. It was the first time I'd actually been inside the operating theater, and it was awful. Even after he had died, the surgeon kept cutting out his organs and tossing them in a waste bin on the side. He wasn't worthy, as we'd already known from the start, but the sight still disgusted me. Then I turned to the guards. He wasn't worthy, but we still have a dozen subjects left. Let's go and prepare the next one, and let's hope they've led a better life. Whew, man, that one was a little bit of a doozy. Not a very long one, but definitely had a really creepy feeling to it. I'll make sure to go ahead and post some other funny ones to go along with these creepy ones so we have a good mix for those of you guys who are interested in these and those of you who are interested in the more funny ones. Not sure what's coming up next, so I guess it's just gonna have to be a surprise. And well, with that, everybody, thank you all so much for watching. It's an absolute pleasure making this for you. I hope you all drive safe, and I'll see you all in the next one.